I thought the man standing behind the security guards was there to protect me. Instead, he looked at me and chose his mother. My mother-in-law accused me of being a threat in my own home. She called her private security. She whispered lies into my husband's ears. And when he finally said, "You need to leave," I realized this wasn't just betrayal. This was war, and I was done staying quiet. It didn't happen overnight. That's what made it so dangerous. At first, it looked like concern disguised as care. My mother-in-law would comment on how I cooked, how I spoke, how I dressed around family gatherings. She framed everything as advice, always ending with a smile that felt polite but cold. I tried to ignore it, telling myself this was normal, that adjusting was part of marriage. But slowly, her presence grew heavier, like a shadow following every decision we made. She began involving herself in things that were never hers to control. What time we woke up, who we visited, how money should be spent. If I disagreed, she would sigh dramatically and say I was being emotional or misunderstanding her intentions. Then she would repeat her version of events to my husband, twisting my words just enough to make me look unreasonable. I started noticing a pattern. Every time I spoke up, I became the problem. My husband changed in subtle ways at first. He would hesitate before responding to me, as if checking his thoughts against someone else's approval. Arguments that used to stay between us now included phrases I knew weren't his. "My mom thinks" became a regular part of our conversations. When I pointed it out, he accused me of being disrespectful. That hurt more than the interference itself, because it meant he was already drifting away from me emotionally. Family dinners turned into quiet interrogations. My mother-in-law would ask questions that sounded harmless, but carried sharp edges underneath. If I answered confidently, she'd smirk. If I stayed quiet, she'd claim I was rude. Either way, she won. The house no longer felt like a safe place. It felt like a stage where I was constantly being judged, scored, and reported on. What terrified me most was how easily she positioned herself as the authority. She spoke with confidence, certainty, and an air of entitlement that made others listen. She had resources, connections, and influence, and she wasn't afraid to remind me of that. Every boundary I tried to set was treated like rebellion. Every attempt at independence was labeled as disrespect. By the time I realized what was happening, she had already rewritten the narrative. In her story, she was the concerned mother trying to protect her son, and I was the unstable outsider threatening family peace. The more I defended myself, the more proof she claimed to have that I was difficult. It was exhausting, isolating, and deeply confusing. That was the day I understood something crucial. This wasn't just a clash of personalities. This was about control. She wasn't trying to guide our marriage. She was trying to own it. And without me even noticing, she had started turning my own husband into an extension of her will. That evening is burned into my memory in a way I'll never forget. It was quiet at first, the kind of silence that feels heavy for no clear reason. I was in the living room when I heard unfamiliar footsteps near the entrance. Voices I didn't recognize. Deep, firm, professional. When I looked up, two men in dark uniforms were standing inside my home, scanning the room as if they were assessing a threat. For a split second, I honestly thought something terrible had happened outside. Then I saw her. My mother-in-law stood behind them, calm and composed, almost proud. She didn't look worried or scared. She looked in control. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about safety. This was a statement. She introduced them as security, explaining that she had felt the need to take precautions. Her words were slow and deliberate, chosen carefully to sound reasonable while painting me as dangerous. She said she felt unsafe, that my behavior had become unpredictable, and that she just wanted to protect her family. I felt my chest tighten. This was my home, the place where I slept, ate, and tried to build a life. And suddenly, I was being treated like an intruder. The guards didn't touch me, but their presence alone was enough to make me feel small and powerless. Every movement I made felt watched. Every breath felt judged. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation. But shock froze me in place. She continued talking, listing incidents that never happened or twisting moments out of context. A disagreement became aggression. Tears became instability. Standing up for myself became a threat. Each lie was wrapped in concern, delivered with a calm tone that made it sound believable. And the worst part was knowing she had prepared this speech long before that moment. This wasn't impulsive. It was planned. I looked at my husband, waiting for him to shut it down, to say this was unnecessary, to tell them to leave. Instead, he avoided my eyes. That hurt more than the uniforms, more than the accusations. His silence told me she had already spoken to him, already convinced him that this was for the best. In that moment, I felt completely alone, surrounded by people who saw me through her version of the truth. The guards asked polite but firm questions, as if they were managing a situation that could escalate at any moment. Their professionalism made it worse, because it validated her narrative. If security was here, there must be a reason. Or so it seemed. I realized then how easily power can be abused when it wears the mask of concern. That night, something inside me shifted. Humiliation turned into clarity. Fear turned into resolve. If she was willing to go this far, to publicly label me as a danger, then this was no longer about family drama. This was about reputation, control, and survival. And I knew that whatever came next, I could never afford to be unprepared again. I kept looking at my husband, searching his face for something familiar. Confusion, anger, even doubt. Anything that would tell me he was still on my side. Instead, what I saw was distance, a carefully controlled expression, like someone trying to stay neutral in a situation where neutrality already meant betrayal. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost rehearsed, and that's when I knew this conversation had happened long before the guards arrived. He told me I was overreacting, that his mother was only trying to keep the peace, that the presence of security was temporary and precautionary. Each word landed like a quiet blow. He didn't ask how I felt. He didn't question why this was necessary. He didn't challenge her version of events. He simply accepted it. And by doing so, accepted a reality where I was the problem. I tried to explain myself, choosing my words carefully, afraid that any sign of emotion would be used against me. I reminded him of moments we shared, conversations we had, plans we made together. I asked him when I had ever been a threat, when I had ever acted in a way that justified this. But it was like talking to someone who had already made up his mind. Every sentence I spoke was filtered through her narrative before it reached him. What hurt the most wasn't his disagreement. It was his lack of curiosity. He didn't want to know the truth. He wanted calm, and calm to him meant compliance. He asked me to cooperate, to make things easier, to step back for a while until things settled down. That's when I realized he wasn't protecting me or our marriage. He was protecting himself from conflict with his mother. I watched him side with her not through anger, but through quiet alignment. He stood beside her physically, mirroring her posture, reinforcing her authority without saying a word. In that moment, the marriage I thought I had felt like an illusion. Trust cracked, not because of shouting or insults, but because of absence. The absence of defense, of loyalty, of partnership. The guards looked at him for cues, not at me, and he gave them permission through his body language, through his silence, through his compliance. When he finally said, "Maybe it's best if you take some time away," something inside me broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. It broke in a clean, painful way that changed how I saw him forever. That was the moment I stopped seeing this as a misunderstanding. This was a choice. He chose his mother's comfort over my dignity. He chose her story over my reality. And in doing so, he taught me a hard truth. Betrayal doesn't always come with cruelty. Sometimes it comes softly, wrapped in calm voices and reasonable explanations. And that makes it even harder to survive. When I realized begging would only confirm the story she was telling about me, I stopped, right there, in the middle of the chaos. I felt something settle inside me. A quiet clarity replaced the panic. If I reacted emotionally, I would lose. That's what she wanted. Tears, raised voices, proof that I was unstable. So I did the opposite. I went silent. Not weak silence, but controlled silence. The kind that observes, remembers, and plans. I left the house with only what I needed. But I didn't leave empty-handed. I took my self-respect with me. Over the following days, I replayed every conversation in my mind, identifying patterns I had ignored before. I began documenting everything. Messages that once felt insignificant now looked like evidence. Comments framed as concern revealed manipulation when placed side by side. I stopped deleting texts and started saving them. I stopped trusting promises and started trusting facts. I learned how powerful information becomes when emotions are removed from it. I wrote down dates, times, exact words. I recorded conversations where it was legal and safe to do so. I spoke less and listened more. Every time my mother-in-law contradicted herself, every time her story shifted, I noted it. She believed she had already won, and that overconfidence made her careless. She underestimated my ability to think strategically, assuming I would either explode or disappear quietly. I reached out to people she didn't expect me to contact. Neutral parties, professionals, individuals who valued truth over family loyalty. I didn't attack her character. I presented facts, calmly, clearly, without exaggeration. I asked questions instead of making accusations. And slowly, cracks began to form in the version of reality she had built so carefully. At the same time, I worked on myself. I refused to let shame define me. I reminded myself daily that being targeted did not mean being guilty. I rebuilt my confidence piece by piece, grounding myself in reality rather than perception. The more stable I became, the weaker her narrative grew. Control thrives on chaos, and I gave her none. What she never understood was that silence can be louder than screaming. My lack of reaction frustrated her. She expected fear. She expected collapse. Instead, she got distance and discipline, while she repeated her story louder. I let the truth mature quietly. I waited for the right moment, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. By the time she realized I wasn't broken, it was already too late. I had transformed from someone reacting to injustice into someone preparing for resolution. I wasn't trying to win an argument anymore. I was reclaiming my voice, my credibility, and my future. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't surviving. I was taking control. The truth didn't explode into the room all at once. It arrived calmly, steadily, and with undeniable weight. By the time everything surfaced, there was no drama left to fuel her version of events. No raised voices, no emotional outbursts, just facts laid out in order. Impossible to ignore. The very thing she had counted on to silence me. My composure became the reason her story began to collapse. Messages were reviewed. Timelines were questioned. Small inconsistencies that once seemed harmless suddenly formed a clear pattern. The narrative she had carefully crafted no longer aligned with reality. What she described as fear looked more like control. What she called protection revealed itself as manipulation. And the more calmly the truth was presented, the harder it became to dismiss. The security company distanced itself quickly once the full context came to light. Their involvement, based entirely on her claims, now appeared unnecessary and inappropriate. Apologies followed. Formal, uncomfortable ones. The authority she had borrowed from uniforms and procedures vanished as soon as the facts were clarified. Power, I learned, only lasts as long as people believe the story behind it. My husband was forced to confront what he had ignored. Seeing proof instead of hearing interpretations changed something in him. Excuses ran out. Justifications collapsed. For the first time, he wasn't listening to his mother. He was listening to reality. That shift didn't erase the pain he caused, but it did strip away the illusion that this was a misunderstanding. He had chosen wrongly, and now he had to live with that truth. What surprised me most was her reaction when she realized control was slipping. There was no apology, no accountability, only denial and quiet retreat. The confidence she once displayed dissolved into defensiveness. When manipulation fails, it exposes itself. And once exposed, it loses its grip. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. Victory didn't look like revenge. It looked like peace. The peace of being believed. The peace of knowing I didn't abandon myself when it mattered most. I stood firm without becoming cruel. Strong without becoming cold. The aftermath wasn't simple. Trust doesn't rebuild instantly. Relationships don't heal on command. But something fundamental had changed. I was no longer the woman who could be intimidated into silence. I had proven, to myself more than anyone else, that truth doesn't need volume to be powerful. She tried to erase me. Instead, she exposed herself, and in doing so, she handed me back my voice, my clarity, and my strength. If this story moved you, opened your eyes, or felt uncomfortably familiar, don't walk away just yet. Subscribe now, because these stories aren't just entertainment. They lessons in strength, truth, and survival. New real-life stories every week. Your support helps these voices be heard.